how can we as Jews who are committed to justice and are committed to racial justice leverage the sanctity of Rosh Hashanah, of this day, of this season, of the days of awe, to advance our racial justice work.
This is Jews Talk Racial Justice with April and Tracie,
a weekly show hosted by April Baskin and Tracie Guy-Decker.
In a complex world, change takes courage.
Wholehearted relationships can keep us accountable.
We have a lot to talk about. Let's dive in.
Hi, April.
Hey, Tracie, we're really doing this.
I know. Hey, Rosh Hashanah is right around the corner.
It is, and I believe it is 5781 that we are soon about to enter.
That's right. 5781. So tell me about Rosh Hashanah. What's your favorite part about it, or how do you think about it? What's your Rosh Hashanah thing?
Yeah, so like basics, obs, that some of us know, but some may not. So it's considered the birthday of the world, and what am I trying to say? Just so I'm a little distracted right now because now I have I was getting into that New Year energy, and so I had Prince's 1999 starting to play in my head, and I was like, it felt very Jewy to be like, party like it's 5781. Okay, so now that I got
that off your chest.
Now that I got that on my chest, now. So what was the question again?
I don't remember. I wanted to hear your thoughts about Rosh Hashanah, besides Prince, what comes up for you?
Yeah, I think that's the first time I thought about Prince and relationship. I normally think more like white clothes and apples and honey and shofars. I think for me, what I feel inspired to talk about right now is the journey that my relationship with Rosh Hashanah has been on over the course of my life, and still some of the existing tensions that I have about the holiday, which is, I had to look it up when we were talking earlier, Tracie, for the word, that this heavy, icky word,
right,
that I attribute to the days of awe around repentance. The Hebrew word for it is teshuvah, and there's something about repentance. This is me, not officially, just it feels very old school oppressive Christian, heavy and judgy and gross, and I just don't like that English repent. It just sounds like all the kinds of things that I'm working to
yeah. I mean, it's no coincidence that it's penitentiary, like a jail. Penitentiary is related to that word. It's not a coincidence, right?
Yeah, it viscerally, and it wasn't until college, I think. I don't want to give the credit to the wrong rabbi with different campus rivalries around different
right heaven forfend
collaborations, but I think it was in college where I learned that the root of teshuvah means to return,
right?
And I was like, that is something I can relate to, this idea of returning to our inherent goodness, who we are in terms of who Shekhinah, Mother Earth, God, the universe, who we fundamentally are. And my understanding from my Jewish upbringing is the understanding that humans are fundamentally born good, or humans are fundamentally good. And so the process of teshuvah, or return, is returning back to our own divinity. And that to me feels poetic and like I can breathe. It aligns with how my dad raised me, which I'll probably say many more times over, where he would always clarify when I was a little kid, which meant a lot, because I remember of experiencing being in the ether as a kid in America, in terms of being in the context of Christian hegemony, that when I would get in trouble at times, I remember having this fear of oh my goodness, does this mean I'm a bad person or I'm a bad kid? I used to be so scared of that. And my dad almost intuitively knew to come to me and say, April, what you did was bad, but you are a good person. You are a good girl. And so when I learned that teshuvah, that the literal meaning in Hebrew, the Jewish meaning of that word is return, that felt more Jewish to me. It felt more humane. It aligned with my understanding of the word. And as I learned that, that totally began to shift and internalize, and I would say even feminize my Judaism for me, about it being something that's not this external patriarchal energy about oppression and the criminal justice system and all judgy, but instead was more like air and flowing and light and movement that's not attached to any particular form, and more about me assessing within myself, where have I not been in alignment? Where have I strayed from what I know to be correct? And how do I reconcile that and engage in the act of tikkun or healing and come back to my own home, and to remember my inherent goodness and cultivate that within myself if and when I've strayed. So there's a lot more I could say about, you know, how I navigate services and how much I love to be in nature. And that's a fundamental tension I feel during the high holidays, is knowing the sacred nature of community. And often, and as someone who's sort of, I would describe myself, for lack of a better word, I always struggle with this, where I fall, as someone who's sort of an ambivert. I want very much to be in community, but I don't have the energy to, or I haven't yet had the energy to establish my own havra with the kinds of people. But like, I often want to be by a moving body of water, or in the woods, or at the ocean, that like the awesomeness that nature provide matches to me the magnitude and sanctity of Rosh Hashanah. So those are some of my reflections of what I come into with Rosh Hashanah, is that I've loved the evolution as I've gotten more deeply connected to Jewish, to the origins of the Hebrew, and outside of the assimilated, some of the more assimilated descriptions, some of which are very much a part of my Judaism. There's no judgment there, but as I've gone more deeply into our tradition, I've found I continue to find so many treasures that are helpful for me along my path. How about for you, Tracie? What's Rosh Hashanah about for you?
Well, I wouldn't have expressed it the way that you just did, though there are some similar things. What's coming up for me right now, interestingly, I haven't connected these two things together, but I'm really loving it, is that I'm reading Tara Brach right now.
Oh, nice.
Radical Compassion. And she tells this story of the Golden Buddha. So that there's this Buddha in a monastery, and it needs to be moved for some reason. And so they bring in a crane because there's this giant Buddha, and when they move it, it cracks, and they get really worried. But then overnight, one of the monks comes out, and he sees something glinting through one of the cracks. And they realized that in fact it was a solid gold Buddha that several hundred years before, monks in the same monastery had covered with clay in order to protect it when marauders were coming through. They were afraid that their Buddha would be stolen, and so they'd put this clay on top and then thought the clay was the Buddha. And so when you're talking about returning to your inner, it's just coming up for me that part of Teshuvah for Rosh Hashanah is realizing the clay that you've put on top of your gold, and trying to remove it and not conflate that clay with who you really are, which is exactly what you're talking about with a totally different metaphor. But even in thinking about shame versus guilt that you just beautifully described, when your dad said you did bad, you were not bad. Even that, like the actions that were bad are the clay, and they can be removed because at heart we're golden. And so that's what's kind of coming up for me just listening to you. That wouldn't have been my answer prior to listening to you. But that's really coming up for me right now. I actually am a little worried for this Rosh Hashanah in the age of COVID. Like, I hear what you're saying about the power of nature, and I do not disagree. And I also find something really comforting about a whole room, sanctuary full of people who are all doing their own work to think about what is clay and what is gold. There's something really powerful about being a part of a congregation, and I'm really going to miss that this year. My synagogue has decided to go almost entirely virtual, which is what the situation demands, so that we don't make each other sick. I mean, to save a life overrules everything, and I'm really going to miss that.
It's not the same. It's not the same. Oh, I love that story so much.
I know, isn't it great? It's
so
so
good.
useful. It's so useful in so many places to think, especially for me, like when I get caught in a
Oh.
shame spiral, right? Then if I
Mhm.
can interrupt that and say, is this real, or is this just the clay that you've put on top in order to protect yourself?
Right, and get
Often
through
the
this
case.
world
Mhm.
and these oppressive systems that we're navigating often. Oh, that's so good. Oh, I love that. And that ties into, I think, what we want to talk about next. Oh, that's so good. Because I think that clay is also, if you could also use that clay as a metaphor for racism in
I
different
think that's right.
ways. And, I do this parlor trick that I think I've done with you before. Um, and I don't have the right, actually I do, I'm going to do it right now. But, Professor Dr. Barbara Love, who's a professor emeritus from UMass Amherst, she's phenomenal luminary, Black liberation luminary, Black and collective liberation. And she always does this like parlor trick thing. I have like my notes on my whiteboard desk here, so I need to like cover it so I don't get it that wet with my bandana. And she talks about similarly, like just like what you're saying, like with the clay, that like that our oppressive patterns that many of us get become like tissue paper, and this is toilet paper, so it's 2-ply, so it's thicker. But often when I do this, even with my light brown skin, you can normally not see this. It becomes
Right.
translucent, right?
Right.
And that what she talks about is these oppressive patterns. And in the context of our show, we mostly focus on race and racism, that it's like this. And at times when we start to talk about this, like what happens with white fragility or some of these things is that we think that our skin is getting cut. But if you have a good facilitator or you take time to read, you begin to start to notice that as it gets lifted up, it's scary, but kind of like the Buddha cracking. But then you're like, oh, actually, wait a second. No, actually, I'm fine. And I can actually start to peel away some of these different beliefs and parse this out. And I think that that's a beautifully poetic transition segue into the next part of our conversation around how can we as Jews who are committed to justice and are committed to racial justice leverage the sanctity of Rosh Hashanah, of this day, of this season, of the days of awe, to advance our racial justice work. And so I thought it might be nice, Tracie, if we take a few moments to think about, for each of us, and I'm happy for you to start, what some of your, unless you want me to, but what are some of your intentions around racial justice for the coming year?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Thank you. So for me, Rosh Hashanah always, the resolutions that I think about for Rosh Hashanah are not like the secular New Year. It's never about losing weight, right? It's about showing up and being more true to who I am, and making sort of spiritual resolutions or intentions, kavanot. And so for me, I've been thinking a lot about, well, teshuva and returning to that path, which we've talked about the fact, you and I have talked about the fact that it really is a practice. Anti-racism is a practice. It's something that you have to come back to again and again and again, like fitness or healthy eating or
Shabbat, the Torah.
exactly. So it's not a thing that you can check off your list. And so my intentions are to continue to show up and to deepen, and also to really look. My intention is to look at my intention. I know that's a little meta, but I think it's really easy for people with white skin or white privilege to fall into performative allyship. Like, am I doing this because it is the right thing and advances racial justice, or am I doing it so that I could get a cookie, an ally cookie, and have someone who, like you or another friend of color to say like, thanks, you're one of the good ones. Like, if that's why I'm doing it, then it's for the wrong reason. And so I really want to get deep behind my own intentions and make sure that I'm not doing it. I'm not centering myself in it in an unhealthy way. So that's the biggest one of sort of the focus of my returning to the practice again and again in the coming year. What about you?
Nice. I think for me personally, as a woman of color, I think it's continuing and deepening. Oh, I could cry. For me, it's facing a lot of my internalized terror around, like I just had this, I'm not a nonlinear thinker, and so I'm trying to be as linear as possible so I can contextualize what I'm saying and feeling right now, but there's like so much. One, just an ongoing kavanot or intention that I have is to continually be as powerful and effective and as nourished as possible as I can be, so that I can sustain my social justice work and increase and strengthen it over the course of my lifetime. And right now I'm at a point in my mid 30s mid pushing late 30s, where I'm wanting to up the ante big time. I make a lot of kavanot. I'm really into intentions at any chance I get. And Rosh Hashanah is one of the biggest, and certainly it's sort of along the lines of what you were saying, Tracie, the most internal for me, around really what am I going for? And the theme that's been coming up for me is stepping into my own power more, claiming my sovereignty. And for me, a part of what that anti-oppressive power looks like is truly cultivating my spiritual health, reaching for a relatively small inner circle of folks who are there and who nourish me and support me, and being really clear about the concentric rings of broader people who I'm blessed to be in relationship with further out, but that I really cultivate that inner world so that I'm prepared to have as meaningful of an impact as possible, and really work on the deeper, more subliminal. But the more I focus on it, the more visible it's becoming. Deeper parts of my being that internalized since I was a child, to not bring my full power and passion to bear, which I think some people would find funny, like, really? You're not already doing that? I'm not already doing that, not as much as I could be. And so the last thing I'll say about this is that I'm continually having epiphanies as I push myself, as I'm constantly in stretch mode and on the edge of my learning. The other day, I had a huge spiritual breakthrough that's deeply personal, and I better understood the Jewish rule or the old traditional rule around not studying the deeper elements of Jewish mysticism until you're 38. I've often resented that, and as a 36-year-old, having been deeply engaged in mysticism and spirituality and my continual evolution, it amazes me that with all of the intention, that how long it takes, our brains don't even develop until we're 29. So for me, it's wanting to really focus in this year around, as a woman of color, accessing more of my power, dissolving the walls that have been established within me that keep me from knowing and leveraging the fullness of my ability and power. So with that, Tracie, I have another question written down for us here to think about in terms of what are some of our, going more broadly, as we enter into 5781, this sacred special Jewish year, what are our racial, for each of us is our, or part of, it might be too much to say all of it, but what are elements of our racial justice vision for the world in honor of this being considered, Rosh Hashanah literally being the head of the year, that this is also a collective global birthday from a Jewish perspective, and what are long-term visions as we blow the shofar instead of the birthday candles and ask ourselves to wake up and welcome in this new year. What's our bigger vision?
April, I think given what you just said about your intention for yourself, you should start with the answer to this one.
Oh, okay. So I think, yeah, so I mean, for me, what I would say is a bunch of different things. I think after this conversation, the answer to this question, I think, is a huge, is a significant linchpin, because I think a lot of people don't know fully what it looks like when racial justice comes. I think that they think it might be like a reckoning for white people who just have everything. I don't, it's like a blank, and I think it's really hard to work towards something when we don't know what we're working toward. And so what I would say, there's so many different things. But what immediately comes to mind for me is when I envision, like the world I envision for us, our world, if our world had achieved racial justice and equity and healing, I think that we would be so incredibly powerful as a human, as a species. To me, I think holistically about collective liberation and justice. So to me, racial justice, when it's achieved, and I know these are also beliefs that come out of many of the leaders and founders of the movement for Black Lives, is that there's a sense of intersectional justice, meaning that all of the different people who are impacted and peoples who are impacted by oppression are thought of well and cared for. So that's one thing for me to say. So I think really holistically, because when I think about racial justice, and if we center the voices of Black folks as the people who are sort of the anchor or the thing holding racism in place from the bottom end of it, that if we think about intersectionality, Black people are queer and poor and are impacted by disabled, all these other things. So if we're going to help Black people and other people of color get free, it's got to be collective liberation. This is something that comes from many different Black liberation leaders. And so in the world that I envision, with some of those things having been achieved, and I don't fully know what the journey looks like, but the outcome is that there's more relaxation and fun, because we've stopped, because we've stopped having to hustle for our worth, and we've started to collectively see that we are inherently divine and deserving of being able to be in meaningful and accountable and beloved relationship and community with each other. And we've figured out how to equitably redistribute and share our different resources. I don't know, and people get what they need. And in my vision of racial justice being achieved, our world is going to be so much better off, because we would be able to drastically benefit, dramatically is what I'm going to drastically shift the old paradigm, and dramatically benefit from all of the collective wisdom and social capital and brilliance is out there. I often used to think, when I lived in Boston, and I lived in a poor Black neighborhood in Boston, and I always found it funny how explicitly racist it was when people, often not meaning to, would talk about it being a bad neighborhood, whereas I experienced it as a family neighborhood, right? That was safe, and where there were connections, and where I knew my neighbors and had the best community health center, or like one of the best, in my opinion, in the Boston area. And anyway, I loved it there. And I remember often riding the bus, and people who were Black and navigating racism and poverty and homophobia and all of these different things had so much pride and resilience, but were clearly tired. And I would think on almost a daily basis, like and I know other people thought about this too, in our own urban cities and countries around the world, like the cure for cancer could be on this bus right now. Multiple innovations that could help us live more sustainably. So for me, a world in which we have racial justice is a world in which every person has the room and space to access and leverage their talents, and that we are interconnected and we support each other. And progress is measured not by more things and bigger things, but progress is measured by the quality of our relationships, and the fact that no one is left behind, and that our innovations, instead of going wider, go deeper. And we figure out how, when we're supporting certain people, how to support them better, how can we how can we decrease their recovery time? How do we increase their sense of love and wholeness that in a world of racial justice and collective liberation, to me, addiction largely wouldn't exist, since so many, not necessarily all, but so many addictions are connected to fundamental elements of loneliness. And because we've contradicted white supremacy culture that's also woven in with capitalism, unchecked, unbridled capitalism and misogyny, we've also dealt with these different patterns that separate us from our fundamental interconnectedness. So those are some of the things. And I'm getting really big and dreamy, but I think even if I bring it down of like, okay, April, like what does that mean in terms of super practical things? What that means is like the studies that I share, the results that I share from multiple studies that demonstrate that multicultural organizations and communities that have intercultural competence, meaning effective abilities to be in relationship with each other and work across lines of difference, that they consistently outperform monocultural institutions and communities, as well as diverse intercultural institutions and communities that lack the effective tools to work effectively across lines of difference. And so what that looks like in the short term is the better we get at racial justice in ourselves, one, I think we're going to have more confidence. And as we work to rid ourselves of internalized racial oppression or superiority, the closer we get, the more deeply we engage with teshuva, and the closer we get to our fundamental divinity and humanity. And I think as we begin to clear up that fog around racism and all the trauma that still lingers in the context of the United States, the more we resolve that, I suspect it's like other forms of trauma, that the more that gets healed, the more clearly we're going to be able to see and move and lead around a variety of issues. How about, that was super meta. I tried to bring it down. I hope that's helpful, but like, so I'm really curious about how you respond to this now, Tracie. I tried to have you go first.
So, yeah, April, you are envisioning a world that, unfortunately, I don't think we will see in 5781, but may it come soon and in our times.
Yes.
But I do think there's some, knowing where you're going, right? Postcards from the destination is a really important part of the journey, right? Because as you said, when you started, that if you don't know what you're working toward, how can you know which direction to go? And so I think it's really important to have that future world articulated. So some of the more practical things that occur to me for 5781 are,
Nice.
You and I have talked about sort of separately offline, how frequently we hear people talk about Black Jewish relations, right? As if there were no Black Jews, as if that Venn diagram were, two circles that don't intersect. And when in fact, the intersection is significant and growing. And so
right,
I think,
Hi.
right. And you're not the only one.
Not at all.
And so I think that having our Jewish community specifically really do some of the work to try and break down that either or thinking of, Jewish or Black, and or even the one that I fell into when you and I were talking, that you're a Jew of color or you're a white Ashkenazi Jew, as if a Jew of color can't have an Ashkenazi parent. So breaking down some of that either or thinking specifically within our Jewish community, so that we are able to more fully recognize, embrace, welcome, hold, nurture our entire community. That's one of my goals for us as a Jewish community in America and in the world, because I think that kind of blinder that we have all put on about like what a Jew is and what a Jew looks like is hurting all of us. Like, so for instance, I hope no one ever says ever again, you don't look Jewish. I hope that phrase is just banished, because I think it's so often said as a compliment, and it's to white-skinned Jews who maybe don't have smaller noses or blue eyes or blonde hair or whatever. It's said as a compliment, which is really messed up. Or it's said in a way to make, it's supposed to be funny to a Jew of color in a way that makes light of their identity. That, yeah, let's just stop saying that. Let's find other ways to engage with one another, in ways that can truly allow folks to feel fully seen. That's my smaller step on the road toward your much bigger vision.
Nice. I love it. And what I would add is like, so I'm wondering what the like positive replacement so you don't look Jewish, because yeah, that should just go. It's antiquated, and I understand where it comes from, and they're very real things, but ideally variables, but they don't account for all of it. Like that you can literally look like any single person. And so whether it's the Jewish Multiracial Network's tagline, Jews come in all colors, or we are a multiracial people, or thinking to yourself, like, I don't think it needs to be said aloud of, wow, like, I just love I love engaging with the diversity of our vibrant community. Yeah,
I think about,
like
I had a doctor within the past couple years, an Asian woman, and she was asked, I don't know, it was like the end of the thing, and she was asking me what I did, and I told her that I worked for a Jewish institution, and she said, oh, I'm Jewish. And I wish I had said, oh, mishpacha, I'm sorry I didn't recognize you. You know, like I wish I had sort of, I didn't. I was like, oh, of course, that's, you know, I don't think I shamed her, or I don't think that I did that, although if I could find her, I would ask her. But it was a moment where I can imagine someone might have said, that's funny, you don't look Jewish, as if it were funny. So when you say like, what else could you say instead? I was thinking about the exact experience where someone might say it. And so I would love to invite us to sort of, in that moment when you were maybe not expecting the person you're talking to be Jewish, to say, oh, we're mishpacha, we're family. I didn't realize. And that kind of can acknowledge your missing it, or correct me.
Or not. Yeah, well, no, I think that's good. I think, I don't even think you necessarily have to say, because in that moment, like, she's your physician. So unless she had like a mezuzah on her office door, which she probably doesn't like, but I think like, we're mishpacha, like we're mishpacha, like we're family. I think that like, I would just leave it at that. You know, like, I'm so glad you know what I mean? That I think, but I love that affirmation. Like, it reminds me of what staff and leaders in the Keshet community talk about. Keshet, the LGBTQ organization and inclusion organization, you know, that they say when someone comes out, that like one of the good responses you can say to someone, particularly a young person, is mazel tov. Like, is there a way that's the equivalent of that, of not necessarily mazel tov, because it's like, we know there's complexity in being Jewish, but like you said, like, it's so great to know that you're a member of our extended Jewish family as well. That I think can be nice, along with other variations. So I think that's a great possible replacement. And if you're meeting someone in the context, which is often frequent of like an oneg, like a meal after Shabbat services, or a snack, of just treating people in that space as though they Jewishly belong. And for the purposes of inclusion, I like to not make assumptions at all for anyone, regardless of what they look like around their Hebrew. So I do the custom that I learned in my Reform context of saying Hebrew words and then saying the English translation just always consistently, unless I know someone, or unless they say, oh, actually I know Hebrew. And I'm like, oh, great. I generally try not to make assumptions about anyone's Hebrew ability, so that we can all engage. And I find that works well. And that asking people simple questions or profound questions around, what did you think of the rabbi's sermon? Or what did you think of services tonight? Or engaging them around, these are my favorite cookies, like anything other than oddly focusing on their identity, unless it's something that they are bringing up and asking to engage in that moment. So yeah, so I think that's about it for now.
L'shana tova umetuka, wishing you a good, sweet, and racially just 5781. Thanks for tuning in. Our show's theme music was composed by Elliot Hammer. You can find this track and other beats on Instagram at Elliot Hammer. If this episode resonated with you, please share it and subscribe. To join the conversation, visit JewsTalkRacialJustice.com, where you can send us a question or suggestion, access our show notes, and learn more about our team. Take care until next time, and stay humble and keep going.